Hey guys, and welcome back to the Pong tutorial. This time we're going to be looking at collisions so that when our ball finally actually hits our player, it'll bounce in the other direction so, the player actually has a chance of not losing. That would be nice game design. Um, but I wanted to show you some quick little changes I made first. Last time we just changed the decoration up a little bit, um, added our offsets to our window size, but I also went ahead and, let's see, where is it? I went to ball, and in the update, when it hits the right side of the screen, I subtracted the offset from that so it would bounce correctly. And I did the same thing for the detection for the wall bouncing off the bottom of the screen. I added that Y 33 offset, and I took that off so that it looks a lot better now. And I also made the player a little bit smaller and moved him over a little bit. So now he's all the way over here. And I think I might have sped him up a little bit too. So yeah, the ball bounces nicely. And of course we haven't done anything with that yet. So for now, the player's going to lose forever. Uh, okay. And a couple of you had a question, I think, about your compiler was complaining about not getting certain methods. And that's because, remember, when we implemented our key listener, right here, our good old buddy key listener, um, when we implemented that, I remember about the contract we signed, how we said we can implement the methods. We can be a key listener, so we can do key listener things, but we have to promise we have certain methods in our class so that we can call these methods. Like these methods are going to be called probably by uh, the JVM or whatever. The methods are going to be called at some point, so we need to have these methods if we're going to be a key listener. So I think what some of you might have done is you might have forgotten to put either key released or key typed in. That would be my guess. Don't worry about it. It's an easy mistake to make. But that's what that error means, is you forgot to put one of the methods you were supposed to. Um, so that's pretty easy to make. Just either add key typed or key released or whatever you forgot to add in. Key type doesn't need anything in it. It's just kind of sitting here, but we need to have it nonetheless. So if you just put in public void key typed, key event E, it should clear up the error for you. Okay, anyway, so collisions. So how are we going to do collisions? Well, collisions are kind of tricky. They're probably one of the hardest things in game programming to get quite right. But let's look and see how our game works right now. Okay, every update, the ball's moving its X and Y. It reverses its X and Y when it bounces. But nothing happens when it hits the player, really. It just kind of passes right through. It doesn't really check to see if it's in the same place as the player is. So that's what we need to do. We need to have the ball be able to check and see, okay, am I inside the player? If I'm inside the player, like if I'm within the coordinates of where the player is, then I'm colliding with the player, so I need to react to that. But just getting it to check it can be a little tricky to understand. But remember, we have to have the ball check and see. Every update has to see if it's within the bounds of the player. So, like as a visual example, I'll wait for it to come back. It's checking, checking, checking. I'm not inside the player. I'm not inside the player. Oh, I share coordinates with the player now. I'm colliding with the player. So that's how we're gonna have to do it. We're gonna have to see if the ball's coordinates share coordinates with the player. Then we can know whether or not it's colliding or not. So that's pretty easy enough. What we're going to do is we're going to make a, let's see, where do we want to put this? We're going to have to make a collision method, either within player or within ball. And let's see, let me think which would be better to do. I think if we put it in ball, it might be best. So we'll head over to ball here. We can just stick this under paint. And we're going to make our own new method, public. Actually, we're going to want a boolean for that. Boolean. Actually, do we need to do that? No, we don't need a boolean. Whatever. So we'll just say public void check collision with, and now we're going to pass it our player object. We're going to give it our player object, the only one we have when we call this, and we'll say player just so it's a little easier to read. Okay. So what we're going to have to do is in game panel, every update, we update the player, we update the ball. And then what we're going to want to do is over in game panel, because game panel has the player object, so we're going to need to have access to that to pass it along to ball, so ball can check the coordinates and kind of compare the values and see if it's inside the player or not. So we just need to say in the update method for game panel, after we update the player and after we update the ball. So what's going to happen is every update, the player is going to move by its x velocity if it has a velocity. Or not x, I'm sorry, y, up and down. So the player is going to move based on its y velocities. The ball is going to move based on its velocities. And then after that, we're going to have the ball check and see if it's colliding with something. And it's going to check that after it's moved, which would make sense. You want it to use the most up-to-date information. So check collision with. And you might think that's kind of a funny name for a method, but if you think about it, it kind of reads a lot more like English if you say it like this. And then we can just pass the player along. Because the player is like a treasure box full of numbers about its coordinates, and it's really easy for the ball to check. So, yeah, it kind of reads like English if you look at it. You know, ball check collision with player. It kind of almost reads like a sentence a little bit. So let's move on over to ball. Now here's the tricky part. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have a couple if statements here. This might be a little hard to follow along, but I'm going to try to go as slow as possible and explain it as best as I can. So let's see. We're going to need two if statements, one within the other. First thing we're going to do is we're going to check and see if the ball's x value is within the boundaries of the player. So that rectangle, that I forget how big it is. I think it's like 10 width. So within that 10 width, 40 height or whatever thing, if it's within those two x values, because those x values aren't going to move. So it's always going to be those x values. We can say if this dot x, so the ball's x value, is just you don't need the this, but I think it'll make it a little easier to read. We're just saying this class's variable, so this class's x value. We want to say if this x value, the top left of the ball, if that is greater than the player's x value, get x. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, okay, so if it's greater than the x and this dot x is less than player dot get y. I think I made those methods. I hope I did. I'm sure I'll find out once I compile. Let's see. Nope, because I'm a freaking idiot. Okay, so this isn't going to take long. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a couple, uh, they're called getter methods. Basically just so other places can check and see what their values are. So we're going to say public int, that is, wow, I can't spell a three-letter word. Public int get x. So this is going to return an int, and I'll give you 3 guesses which variable it's going to return. Correct, I think. I hope you were correct. And all this is for is just so things like ball can check check on the values of what the player is, just so it can kind of get information like this, which we need. So other classes might need to know what the x value or the y value of the player is, and this lets them know without potentially being able to change them. That's the point of having these, if that makes sense. So that's just gonna pass along its x and y value. Whoa, come on now, what the hell? Oh yeah, because I didn't make an x variable, because the x is never gonna move. So I'm just gonna say 35, return 35, that's what the x is. Probably would have been smarter for me to make an x value. That way if I ever want to change it, I only gotta change it in one place. But, whatever. So this should compile fine now. Okay, yep. So, what are we doing here? If the ball's x value, the top left of the ball, is greater than the top left of the player. So, let's see here. See if I can keep these two things open for you at the same time. Okay, I'll bring this back on in a second. So head on over to ball here. Okay. So we got our if statement down here. Okay, so this is the top left of our player right here. This little dot here, the top left. And the x is never going to change, obviously. So right now it's 35. X, you can pretty much substitute player dot get x as 35. Because that's what it's always going to be no matter where we are. The x is always going to be the same. So the ball's checking this. Every update, the ball is saying, okay, is my x greater than the x? Right now, yes, 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 no. Yes, 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 yes. Right now, yep. The x is still greater than 35 right now, the top left of the player. Still greater, less than, still greater. So that first part says as long as it's to the right of the top left, then that's fine. And the second part says, okay, but it also has to be to the left of the top right. So it has to be past the top left, but less than the top right. So it has to be within this little tiny window for the if statement to go true. And that's what we want. We want it to say, for the x value anyway, we want to say if the ball's x is in this little tiny window here, then goes true. And we're going to do the same thing for the y. If the first statement goes true, if it is indeed between this little tiny box here, this little width of the player here, then that's going to be true. But then after that, we're going to check for the y. We're going to say, okay, but is the ball's y within the height of the player? And then if both of those if statements return true, then the ball must be within the player somewhere. Because it's both within this window, this left to right window, and it's within this up and down window of the player. So it has to be within the player. And that's how we can check collisions. So let's see. We can say if, and this is basically going to be pretty much the same thing. we can say this dot y is greater than player dot get y. You should always try to make methods to return the value for all your variables, just in case like a situation like this comes up where we want to know some of this information about other classes, and it's nice to be able to access it without changing it. This dot y is less than, oh, you know what? Hold on a second. I don't know why I did that because I'm an idiot. Player.getX. Okay, I'm going to have to add a couple more. Let's see. Okay. So I'm just going to make 2 more of these. I hope this doesn't confuse you. I feel kind of bad now because I'm jumping back and forth and I feel like I'm confusing you guys. Okay, get width. And this method will just let us peek into the player and see what the player's width is. Which isn't going to change, but because the player's always going to be the same size. Public int get height. And that's going to return the height. Who knew? Okay. I'll try to explain this in a minute why we need to do that. Okay. Dot player dot get width. Okay. So now you guys remember when in our update for when we detected when to have the ball bounce, and remember before how for the right side of the screen and the bottom part of the screen we had to do our detections a little bit differently. We had to add the size on top of our we had to add the sizes along with our x and y value, and that's how we specify the top right or the bottom. So for example, for the x plus size, remember x is the top left. So if we want to point to the top right instead, we have to take the x plus the size or the width, and that will give us whatever the top right is. I hope I explained that well enough. Because you know the size or the width, it stretches across the whole size of the ball. So if we have our x as the top left and we add the width to that, that'll give us the top right. I hope that makes sense. So that's basically the same thing what we're doing here. This first part of the if statement, this right here, this just says is the ball's top left past the to the right of the paddle's top left, the player's top left. And so it's to the right of the back of the player. That's what we want. But now we want to say is the x of the ball, is that less than, so is that behind the front of the paddle? And the front of the paddle is the top right of the paddle. And so if we want to express what the top right of the paddle is, that's the top left of the paddle plus the width of the paddle. Same thing what we did for the ball here. The top right of the ball is the top left of the ball plus the width of the ball, which the size, it's the same thing. So that's how we say, so this pretty much reads, is if the top left of the ball is to the right of the back of the paddle. So let's launch our game here so I can show you a bit visual. Okay, so my mouse is at the top top left of the paddle, the back of the paddle. So is the ball's X within or greater than it? Right now, yes. Yes, it's greater than, it's to the right of the back of the paddle. It still is right now. Still is, still is, still is. It's not. It is, it is, it is. So that first part of the if statement is always coming true pretty much. Is it in front of the back of the paddle? And the second part is saying if the ball is to the left of the front of the paddle, which while it's over here, it will be true. So it has to be, in order for the whole if statement to come true, the ball has to be to the right of the back of the paddle and to the left of the front of the paddle. So it has to be in the paddle in order to, for the whole thing to come true. And that's just for the X, but it's the same thing for the Y. So that whole if statement is only going to return true when it's within the two corners of the paddle. I really hope that makes sense. This is really hard to explain collision detection. But that's why we needed the width, is so we could express mathematically what the top right of the ball is, what the front of the paddle was. And we need the width to be able to say that. And it's the same thing here. If the Y is lower than the top of the paddle, but it's higher than the bottom of the paddle. And that's the same thing. We can say player dot get Y. That's a capital Y. Okay. What am I doing? There we go. Plus player's height. I tell you guys, I type about as well as a 6th grader on crack without a keyboard. That's how bad I type. Okay, so I think we'll leave it at that for now. Let's see if that compiles first. Okay, well, I'll set that. So, for now, we have the detection set up. So, right now, these two if statements will detect together when, if we can get inside the second loop here, if this one goes true, then it'll check this one. So if we can get inside the second if statement, then ball has collided with player. So now we can do whatever we want in here. Whatever we want in here, we can put, because whatever we put in here will happen whenever the ball has collided with the player. But we'll do that in the next video.